All right, you should be finished. Welcome back. You should be finished with the pastel line practice. We started that practice with these long skinny sheets of paper, and I had you first off label them. This one says flat wash. This one has two labels. It says graded wash here and variegated wash. We're going to be practicing watercolors right on top of those next. I also had you practice drawing a pumpkin with the underlying shapes first and then contour lines. We're going to be doing watercolor washes that we practice here first into the pumpkin once we're done with that. Keep this out of your way so you don't damage it while you're using your watercolors, all right? And I'm going to be demonstrating on my tabletop here how to paint these different washes that we've already labeled on the paper. So if you'll look down here with me, here's my work area. You need to have a good big surface and a solid surface to work on. I've got a vinyl table here because I can get it wet and it's not going to damage it. I can just wipe it up. If you're working at a place where like it's a carpet or a hardwood floor or even a dining room table that's made of wood, you should put something down like newspaper or wax paper or something to keep the paint and the water off of the surface. If you're working on carpeting, I recommend you move to a tabletop or a countertop somewhere. It'll be easier to do all of this work on a solid, harder surface. The watercolors that you have are relatively inexpensive watercolors. For as many students as I have in my beginning level classes, this is the best I could do for you at short notice when we went to distance learning. When you open it up, you just kind of press at the side here and it makes it easy to open it up. And take this piece of paper out. The paper just tells you how to remove stains, and after you read it, or if you don't care about it, just recycle this little piece of paper. It just gets in the way. You don't want to keep putting it back in here because then it'll make a mess. This container of watercolors came with its own little brush that's just not very good quality, and it's not going to do the best work. But if this is the only one you have, then that's what you're going to have to work with on this project. And it's going to take a long time to do our bigger painting than just these little practices. If you have access to better or bigger brushes, I recommend get them and use them for this project. I've got a big brush here that'll cover a big area much more quickly than this little tiny one will. This is called a flat because it's flattened out when they attach the bristles to the ferrule. They kind of flatten it out, and that holds it to the handle. These bristles cover a bigger area faster. This is called a round because it's not flattened out, and it is better for line work and for controlled details and stuff like that, whereas this one fills a big area faster, and that's what we're going to be doing with our washes. But you can still do that with a smaller round brush. It's just going to take you longer to do. So if you have access to a bigger brush, even if it's a round brush, I recommend it. And if you don't have one, you can always buy them at Michael's or at University Art. You can buy them online from somewhere like Amazon. You could even go to a hardware store and find some better quality house painting brushes. And they can cost you anywhere from a couple dollars all the way up to $200 for a brush like this. This isn't a $200 brush, but it's a $35 brush, right? So they can be kind of expensive, so you want to pay attention to the price. You don't want to get a really expensive brush to do the work that we're doing. All right, so we're going to be working first on the flat wash. It's the one that is not folded, so make sure it says flat wash up at the top. Put the other one out of the way so you don't get splatters on it. And we're going to be doing what's called a wash. So I'm going to prep my surface here. When we're doing a wash, it's best to have your pigment all set up. A wash means you have lots of water in it, like you do when you're washing your clothes, right? You need a lot of water to do the wash. Well, with a watercolor wash, you need water too. We're going to hydrate the cakes. The cakes of pigment are really dry, so we need to get water on them. That's why it's called watercolor. You need to activate the pigment with water to make it move from the cake to your brush, from your brush to your paper. So there are a couple ways that we're going to do that in this class. I'm going to use this medium-sized flat brush. I'm going to take some water. Let me show you. I've got two containers of water, one here for clean water okay? You need a container of water because you need water to add to your watercolors. Then I've got a second container here to clean my brush out when I change colors. You always want to have a second container for doing that. So I've got everything I need. And it doesn't have to be bowls for the containers. It could be cups. It doesn't have to be big, but the bigger it is, the more likely it'll last you a little longer. When I'm doing this, I clean out my brush first because you never know what's been in it. Tap out the extra water, then I get water, and I get the extra out of it. I don't want it to get too wet too soon. So I just kind of do this and let it drip out without tapping it out. Now I want to use a color that contrasts with the colors I have here. I could use the green is a good contrast, the yellow and the orange. The others start looking as dark as the brown lines I have. Any colors you want to use that contrast with what you've got here. Contrast means a good difference in, all right, in this case. I'm going to use the green, I'll use the green. So I'm going to hydrate the green here by getting water in my brush, and then I just tap my brush. I'm not digging into it. I just rotate my brush like this while I'm tapping into the cake with my wet bristles. And what I'm doing is I'm hydrating the upper layer of the watercolors and making kind of a paste out of it. Once it's kind of pasty and there's nothing really much happening, you want to take it out of that little pot that's there and move it to the tray lid. This tray lid is our palette where you put paint to mix it and you put it to mix with water or another color. So I'm going to load up my brush with that pigment and I'm going to drag it across that little divider that's built into the lid. That's what it's there for, is to unload the pigment. Once I've got it unloaded, I pick up more pigment and I drag it across and I unload it. And I do it again. Now I'm going to run out of pigment. That pigment's not enough to do this whole piece of paper. So I'm going to get a little bit more fresh water. I'm going to hydrate more pigment, more paint. And then I'm going to download it here onto the tray lid. Okay, so I'm being careful not to damage my brush as I'm doing this, and I'm going from side to side and rotating my brush as I do it to get it to stay there rather than lifting back up into my brushes. So now I'm ready to go to the next step. I clean out my brush really well in the one water, and now I want to put water down here. The water that I put here will help it to do a flat, even application of the color onto the surface. So I'm going to put water there. You know what? I'm going to add a little bit more of this that I have here to here. I just realized I made a lot, but I didn't drag it all over here. So I want to have as much as possible over here so it's usable. There we go. That's more like what I want. That's what happens when you talk and do work. You forget about what you're doing. All right, so now I'm going to clean out my brush, tap out the dirty water, get clean water, and please watch this. I am not overbrushing, but I'm applying water from side to side on this paper, going from top to bottom. I'm not pressing hard. I'm just letting the top of the bristles go back and forth as I go across this. If I press hard, I'm going to damage the paper and I'm going to damage the lines that I did with the pastels. You have to go kind of fast, and if you're on a surface like this, it's okay to go onto the surface with your brush, right? That's why I've got this surface. I stopped about 1/2 inch from the bottom, and I started right below the label, and it looks like it's evenly covered. It's really wet. Now I'm going to get rid of the extra water there, and I'm going to pick up my pigment. I load up my brush, and this is a flat wash. Here's how you do it. You take what's in your brush and you go from side to side and you pick up your more pigment and you start below it. Go side to side. Each one is overlapping the previous brush stroke, and I load up more brush, more pigment for each stroke as I go down. That way it's not going to change in purity as it goes from top to bottom. And we can control. See how it's getting kind of splotchy? We'll control for that. And it looks like I still could have used a little bit more pigment. So I'm going to real quickly make a little bit more here. Oops, I used the dirty water too. Oh well, it's only green right now. All right, that's a good amount of pigment right there. Okay, so I reload my brush. 1, 2, reload. 1, 2, reload. 1, 2, reload. 1, 2, reload. All right, I'm going to put a little more there. So I'm going to clean out my brush real quick, tap it out. Now I can control where that watercolor goes by tilting and turning my paper. So I'm going to make sure that it stays a flat wash and doesn't turn into puddles of darker and lighter as much as I possibly can by just tilting and turning it. Notice that little white spot there? I can brush into it with my clean brush, and now I've got that little spot covered. All right, so I'm twisting and turning, tilting it to make it go where I want it to go. I want it to go into that little space right there a little more, right? But I want to watch it on this side because it's starting to go off the paper. And I don't want to waste the pigment. I want it to stay on the paper as much as possible. So I'm tilting it this way to go back down to the bottom again because I had it going the other way a lot. All right. So a little bit of that. Remember I said you should always have paper towel or a rag that you can clean up your surface, well, and your hands. So this is a good use of your paper towel, right? I cleaned it up before I put it back down. All that water doesn't go back into the paper, okay? So hold on to that paper towel because you might want to use it some more as we're working today. And I can twist and turn and tilt and bend it any way I want it to go, all right? So that's a flat wash. It's going to dry nice and evenly as much as possible. These areas where it's a little more pigment than others, it'll be a little greener in this case. And I can control for that by continually tilting and turning the paper so that it kind of runs back in and on top of itself and evens out more, right? So I never want to use my paper towel to clean off this because that just leaves a big area. But I can use my brush, a dry brush, can come in and do what's called mopping. I can pull out a little bit of an area if I need to, right? All right, so I'm going to put that off to the side, and we're going to talk about the next type in our next video, which is two of them, a graded wash and a variegated wash.